Everyone all set? Affirmative team? All right, let's get started. The affirmative speaker opened up his last speech by stating how it is a United States strategic interest to end support to Lebanon. But our basic principle as the negative team, which I'd like to echo again, is that abandoning influence does not solve any problem. And because it does not solve any problem, there is no U.S. interest being achieved, and the plan ought not to be passed. There are a couple points under this goal I'd like to bring up. First, that there is no concrete improvement offered. The fact that the plan itself, the mandate, is described as removing U.S. influence by removing aid, both military and economic, to Lebanon, is by definition removing our influence. There is no improvement that can be gained under this. The second point is that there are concrete disadvantages. So the more relevant discussion here is whether the plan should not be passed. And as we brought up consistently throughout this debate, there are actually concrete disadvantages to passing the plan, in addition to them not actually accomplishing anything concrete. So I'd like you to keep that in mind as we move forward. So they first brought up that argument about how Lebanon is a terrorist haven and that Hezbollah is certainly a threat. My response to all of these things, talking about how missiles are pointed at Israel and that there's a Hitler Youth and that Hezbollah is a problem, is that there's no impact to the United States. My partner brought this up in her last speech as well. Simply, Hezbollah is active in that region and is sowing terror, but this is not a threat to the United States. Because of this, when we send our aid in this way, it does not impact to the threat of a threat to America. And so because of that, it's not a U.S. strategic interest if it doesn't significantly change our position or Lebanon's position in that region. It is an abuse, certainly, but it's not something that falls under a U.S. strategic interest. Because we have to be very careful about where we spend our resources, as I brought up early in my first speech. They also talked about how there are not enough sanctions right now, and when they responded to my inherency point about sanctions by saying that it's not enough. And my response to that is no additional sanctions under plan. As I brought up, there are sanctions currently against Hezbollah that have been put in place, but the affirmative team's plan just simply removes aid. There is nothing under the context of that saying that they could provide an advantage to what's currently there. They're saying that what's currently there isn't enough, but then they don't provide a way to increase what's currently there. So that argument simply doesn't stand. Now, next they responded to a number of disadvantages, and I'd like to address first our disadvantage two, which is that the U.S. loses influence. Their response was saying that we've already lost influence, but that is a non-response. It still stands that by the fact, as we brought up under the evidence, that we lose influence further by removing our aid. That's a non-response, and our disadvantage of losing influence by passing the affirmative team's plan further still stands. Their response to our first disadvantage was very similar. It says that Hezbollah is gaining power, and then they said that, well, Hezbollah is already very strong. Once again, that's a non-response. What we stand to lose through this plan is that Hezbollah will gain more power. If they're a power-hungry terrorist group, they will attempt to gain more power. This is, again, a non-response because it's something that will take place if we remove our influence in that region. And then again, that third disadvantage was that Russia fills the void. And what they brought up as a response was saying that Russia is not technologically equipped the same, so they wouldn't be able to completely fill the void the United States has left. I asked the affirmative speaker for evidence of that statement in cross-examination, and he was unable to provide it. So we cannot accept this statement as fact. As far as we know, based on the evidence we brought up, Russia would completely be able to fill the void that we leave when we leave Lebanon, and because of that, we harm our strategic interests directly because Russia's influence in that region is not something we would like. So going on once again back to the issue of Israel, they closed their speech by talking about how Hezbollah is committed to the destruction of Israel. And my response is the same as the response I brought up to this point in my last speech. AF offers no solution to help Israel. The fact that Israel is being threatened by Hezbollah is a real one. In fact, again, Israel is being threatened on all sides by all of its neighbors. But the affirmative offers no solution to help Israel. Although we agreed in cross-examination that the affirmative team is attempting to provide a practical advantage, what we can see based on the facts and the responses we brought up is that they only provide a moral advantage or a moral goal. And because a moral goal is not a proper justification for foreign policy, it cannot be utilized. What we've seen through all of these points of argumentation we brought up is that the affirmative team cannot and will not be able to provide any sort of practical advantage to passing their plan. It achieves no concrete U.S. strategic interest. So that's one main point. The second main point is that there are many disadvantages. And we just went over how all those disadvantages stand. The fact that Hezbollah will gain power through the plan, the U.S. will lose influence through the plan, and that Russia will fill the void. All of which directly harm U.S. interests, U.S. strategic interests, which are the crux of U.S. foreign policy. So because of all these reasons, we can see that while the affirmative team's plan is morally culpable and it tries to reach a goal that makes sense, It does not, in practical terms, achieve any practical goal. And because of that, it must not be passed.